The road had stolen the last of her shoes. Elara Vaughan did not look down at them, at the cracked leather and the sole that flapped with every weary step. To look was to acknowledge the finality of it, the last shred of her old life surrendering to the grit and mud of this new one. Hope felt like a phantom limb, an ache for something that was no longer there. 3 years since the world had fallen out from under her, leaving her with nothing but a name nobody dared to speak, and a desperate, gnawing hunger. Blackwood Manor rose from the mist like a granite cliff. It was not a welcoming place. It was a declaration of power, of permanence, of everything she had lost. The wrought iron gates were taller than 2 men, crowned with sharp, unforgiving spikes. Elara's hand trembled as she reached for the bell pull, her knuckles white against the cold metal. The sound echoed in the unnerving silence, a tiny, impertinent noise against the vastness of the estate. 2 footmen in immaculate livery emerged from a gatehouse, their expressions identical masks of bored disdain. They took in her travel-stained dress, the wildness of her hair pinned up in a desperate knot, and finally their eyes fell to her feet. A smirk bloomed on one man's face. The other chuckled, a low, cruel sound. "We're not taking on kitchen scamps today," the first one said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Be off with you." Elara's chin lifted. The gesture was instinct, a ghost of the lady she had once been. "I am not here for the kitchens. I am here to see the Duke." This pronouncement was met with open laughter. It was not the sound of mirth, but of mockery. It scraped against her raw nerves, threatening to undo the fragile composure she had spent miles building. "The Duke?" The second footman wheezed, wiping a tear of amusement from his eye. "And I suppose the king is expecting you for tea? Go on, girl. Don't waste our time. I will not leave until I have spoken with him," she insisted, her voice quieter than she intended, but firm. It was the only thing she had left. This one, desperate, impossible plan. "She has spirit. I'll give her that," the first one noted to his companion, as if she were a stray dog showing its teeth. "Look here, miss. His Grace, the Duke of Blackwood, does not receive people like you. He doesn't receive much of anyone, for that matter. Now, unless you want us to help you on your way, I suggest you turn around and walk back the way you came." Elara stood her ground. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. She had nothing to go back to. The road behind her was an abyss of starvation and despair. This gate, this cold, unyielding fortress, was her last chance. She opened her mouth to speak again, to plead or demand, she wasn't sure which, when a new voice cut through the air. "What is the meaning of this?" The voice was deep, resonant, and carried an authority that turned the footmen to stone. They snapped to attention, their faces paling. A tall figure had emerged from the winding path that led from the main house, his long coat unbuttoned against the chill. He moved with a quiet purpose that seemed to consume the space around him. As he drew closer, Elara could see he was a man in his prime, with dark hair that the wind had slightly disordered, and a face that seemed carved from intellectual severity. His eyes, a startling shade of deep moss green, were fixed on his guards, but it was his hands that caught her attention. The fingers of his right hand were stained with ink, a dark smudge against his pale skin. "Your Grace," the first footman stammered, bowing low. This person was causing a disturbance. We were just sending her away." The Duke's gaze shifted from his men to Elara. It was a slow, methodical appraisal, missing nothing. He saw the worn dress, the thinness of her frame, the desperate hope warring with humiliation in her eyes. And then his gaze, like the footman's, fell to her shoes. The laughter was gone now, replaced by a thick, anxious silence. The air grew taut. For a moment, he said nothing. His expression was unreadable, a mask of aristocratic control. Elara's breath caught in her throat. She had failed. He would send her away and the last ember of her plan would be extinguished. But then, his eyes lifted back to her face, and something shifted in their depths. A flicker of disbelief, of dawning recognition that made no sense. He took a step closer, his focus so intense it felt like a physical touch. He seemed to be looking not at her, but through her, at a memory. Vaughan, he said, the name a soft exhalation of breath. Not a question, but a statement of impossible fact. Lady Elara? The world tilted on its axis. The footmen stared, their jaws slack with astonishment. Elara could only nod, a tiny, jerky movement. How could he possibly know her name? How could this man, this powerful, reclusive duke, recognize the ghost of a girl whose family had been erased from society? The Duke of Blackwood turned a look of glacial fury upon his footman. You will open these gates. You will go to your quarters. You will not emerge until I send for you. Is that understood? Yes, your grace, they mumbled in unison, scrambling to obey. The great gates swung inward with a protesting groan. He turned back to Elara, the severity in his face softening into something she could not name. It was not pity. It was something deeper, more complex. Forgive them, he said, his voice now a low murmur meant only for her. I have been looking for you for 3 years. He offered her his arm. Elara stared at the fine wool of his coat sleeve, then at her own grimy hand. She could not possibly touch him. But he waited, his arm held steady, his green eyes patient. Hesitantly she placed her fingers on his arm, a feather-light touch, and allowed the Duke of Blackwood to lead her through the gates of his home. Away from the mocking world, and into a mystery deeper than any she could have imagined. The grand entrance hall was a cavern of marble and silence. Her ruined shoes made no sound on the polished floor, making her feel even more like an apparition. The Duke led her past stern-faced portraits of his ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to follow her with silent judgment. He did not take her to a receiving room or a parlour. Instead, he led her to a small, private study, dominated by a massive desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, dancing light over the room. Please, he said, gesturing to a worn leather armchair by the fire. He did not sit himself, but stood by the mantelpiece, watching her. The silence stretched between them like a thread of spun glass, beautiful and ready to shatter. A housekeeper, a formidable woman with grey hair pulled into a severe bun, appeared at the door. Her eyes widened fractionally at the sight of Elara, but her expression was quickly schooled into neutrality. Mrs. Gable, the Duke said, his tone leaving no room for question. This is Lady Elara Vaughan. She is my guest. She will be staying with us. Please have the rose suite prepared for her, and bring tea, and food, something substantial. Very good, Your Grace, the woman, Mrs. Gable, replied, her gaze lingering on Elara for a moment before she departed with a crisp nod. Elara sank into the chair, the soft leather a luxury her body had forgotten. The warmth from the fire began to seep into her chilled bones, but the cold knot of confusion in her stomach remained. Your Grace, she began, her voice hoarse, I do not understand. I imagine you do not, he said. He moved from the mantelpiece to the desk, his ink-stained fingers resting lightly on a stack of papers. Your father, Lord Julian Vaughan. We were correspondents. This was another shock. Her father, a quiet scholar obsessed with botany, corresponding with a duke. About what? She whispered. Orchids, he said simply. Specifically the Dendrophylax lindeni, the ghost orchid. He believed he had discovered a way to cultivate it from seed, a feat no one had managed before. He sent me his research. He also sent me examples of his illustrator's work. He paused, his green eyes locking with hers. "He sent me your drawings, Lady Alara." The room seemed to shrink. Her art. The one piece of herself she had treasured, the quiet hours spent with pen and watercolor, capturing the delicate veins of a leaf or the intricate curl of a petal. It was the only part of her father's legacy she had managed to carry with her. A single, battered sketchbook saved from the wreckage. "I was preparing to fund his expedition," the Duke continued, his voice low and laced with a strange old regret. "We were on the cusp of a significant discovery. And then I received word of his death, of the collapse of the estate. By the time my agents arrived, you were gone, vanished." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw past the ducal authority to the man beneath. She saw a flicker of frustration, of a puzzle left unsolved for 3 long years. "I have been searching for any trace of you or your father's final notes ever since." Mrs. Gable returned with a tray, her movements efficient and silent. She set down a silver teapot, delicate china, and a plate piled high with sandwiches and small cakes. The aroma of fresh bread and warm tea made Ilara's head spin with a hunger so profound it was painful. She waited until the housekeeper had gone, her hands trembling in her lap. "The notes are gone," she said, the words tasting of ash. Everything was seized. Sold. The books, the research, everything. "I see," he said, his expression closing off again. He looked disappointed, and a fresh wave of failure washed over her. She had come here with a half-formed plea for employment, perhaps as a companion or a governess, using the faint hope that a duke interested in botany might value her skills. She had not expected this. She had not expected to be a missing piece of his past. "Please," he said, his voice softening as he gestured to the tray. "You must eat." She did, her movements stiff and awkward at first, then driven by a desperate need. She ate with the focused intensity of the truly starved, trying and failing to maintain the decorum that had been drilled into her since birth. The Duke, to his credit, turned away and pretended to examine a book from his shelf, granting her a small measure of privacy. When she was finished, a sense of profound exhaustion settled over her. The warmth, the food, the sudden, shocking safety of her surroundings were a potent combination. "You will stay here, Lady Alara," the Duke said, turning back to her. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. "You are safe here. We will discuss the future later. For now, you must rest." Mrs. Gable reappeared to guide her to the Rose Suite. It was a set of rooms larger than the entire cottage she had last shared with 2 other families. A fire was already blazing in the bedroom hearth, and a hot bath had been drawn in the adjoining chamber. Laid out on the bed was a simple but elegant nightgown of soft lawn. As she soaked in the steaming water, the grime and sorrow of the road melting away, Alara felt a sense of profound dislocation. She had knocked on a door she had no right to knock on, and the man who answered had been looking for her for 3 years. She was no longer a beggar. She was a guest, a project, a ghost he had finally captured. She did not know which was worse. The first few days at Blackwood Manor passed in a surreal haze. Alara slept for most of them, her body and spirit succumbing to a bone-deep exhaustion she hadn't allowed herself to feel during her years of struggle. She ate the meals that were brought to her on a tray, the food rich and plentiful, and she slowly began to feel human again. The Duke left her to her own devices, a courtesy for which she was profoundly grateful. Her new wardrobe appeared as if by magic, simple day dresses of good wool and cotton in muted shades of blue and grey. Her torn shoes were gone, replaced by sturdy, soft leather boots. The transformation was so complete that the woman who looked back at her from the mirror was a stranger, paler, thinner, and with a haunted look in her eyes that the old Alara had never possessed, but a lady nonetheless. On the 4th day, she felt strong enough to explore. The house was a labyrinth of quiet corridors and dust-sheeted rooms. The silence was absolute, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock or the distant muffled sounds of a servant at work. It was a lonely place, she realized, a grand empty shell waiting for a life that never seemed to happen. She found her way to the library. It was even more magnificent than the Duke's study, a 2-story cathedral of books, with a rolling ladder to reach the upper shelves. Sunlight streamed through tall, arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. This was a room that felt lived in. Books were stacked on tables, one left open as if its reader had just stepped away. And on a large table in the center of the room there were botanical texts, dozens of them, open to pages filled with exquisite illustrations of orchids. She was tracing the lines of a cattleya with her fingertip when he spoke from the doorway, making her jump. "I thought I might find you here." The Duke, Alistair, as he had insisted she call him in private, walked into the room. He was dressed less formally today. Without a coat, his shirt sleeves rolled up slightly, revealing strong forearms. The ink stains were still on his fingers. "It is a magnificent collection, Your Grace," she said, her voice still shy. "Alistair," he corrected gently. "And it is my one true passion. A quiet obsession, my father called it." A faint, sad smile touched his lips for a moment. He preferred horses. He walked to the table and stood beside her, his presence a warm, solid thing in the quiet room. He smelled of old paper, ink, and a faint, clean scent of winter air. "My interest is academic," he said. "But yours? Your father wrote that you had the gift, that you could see the life in a plant, not just its structure." Elara's cheeks warmed with a flush of pleasure. "My father was a kind critic. He was a scientist," Alistair countered. "They are not known for their kindness, but for their precision." He picked up a book, its pages filled with the famous engravings of Georg Dionysius Eret. "This is masterful. It is accurate. But it is cold." He then looked at her. "Your drawing of the ghost orchid, the one your father sent me, it had a soul. He had kept it." The thought sent a strange flutter through her chest. "I have nothing left of my work," she said, the admission costing her. "Only one sketchbook survived, and it is mostly filled with rough studies." He seemed to consider this for a moment. Then he walked to a cabinet in the corner of the library and unlocked it. He returned with a fresh, leather-bound sketchbook, a box of fine charcoal pencils, and a set of watercolors. He placed them on the table before her. "Then you will begin again," he said. His words settled over her like a heavy velvet cloak, strangely warm and suffocating all at once. "There is a conservatory at the west end of the manor. It is my private domain. The collection of orchids is extensive. You may use it as you wish. Consider it your studio." It was not a request. It was a commission, a purpose. He was giving her back the one thing she thought she had lost forever. But it was also a chain, binding her to him, to this house, with a debt of gratitude that felt impossible to repay. "Thank you, Your Grace," she whispered. "Alistair," he said again, and this time there was a hint of warmth in his green eyes.